Hi guys, welcome back to the Spurred On podcast, and it's interview time again. I've got with me a man who I found on Twitter with some of his Spurs takes that I have to say I agreed with the majority of. So I slid into his DMs, I challenged him to a penalty competition, he pulled my pants down, won 100 quid of my money, and now I've got him on the Spurred On podcast. It's Harry Brooks. Harry, how are you, mate?
I'm good, thank you, mate. Yeah. Do I get £100 for this one, or no? No, not this one. No.
I've
Okay,
actually
fair
I've
enough.
actually had to give up football penalty gamble, which for anyone who never saw it, I used to challenge people to take 5 penalties against me, and if they scored all 5, they won money. Harry and 2 of his students, who he
Yeah.
coaches, pulled my pants down, or at least one of them did, I think.
Well, rumor has it that I might have cheated on my ones. Apparently, according to the rule book, I wasn't allowed to do what I did. So, yeah. Unfortunately, you're not going to get the money back, I'm afraid, mate. So that's
No, no,
that's one.
that's fair enough. I mean, I don't think you cheated with the penalties, but I think the spot was a bit too close for the size of the
Yeah,
goals.
yeah. I knew I had a big advantage when you came down. I did know that much.
But
Yes.
I would say that I don't want to sound like a whinging Spurs fan. But Harry, just let me double check with you. You are a Spurs fan, right?
I am a Spurs fan. Yeah, yeah.
Man.
Begrudgingly for a few years, I must admit, but part of that is due to how the club was performing, and part of that is also just due to the nature of my work. It's very hard to be biased towards any club for obvious
Yeah.
reasons.
Well,
Um,
give the viewers and listeners a little idea about your coaching. Just tell them a little
yeah,
bit about it so they get an idea.
yeah. So I basically coach professional and academy footballers outside of their clubs. It's a three-pronged approach. It's coaching, so it's when they get available pitch time. Obviously, I coach them. Analysis, so I watch their games and provide video for them. In terms of I might be grabbing clips from elsewhere and just sending feedback in. It could be a number of ways to analyze their game. And then the third thing, which a lot of people perhaps don't appreciate, but is arguably the most important, is the mentoring, which sort of helps them navigate, you know, day-to-day life through football and yeah, life in general, to be honest. And I do still work with grassroots players as well. I always want to keep my hand in that. I quite enjoy that. But that's it in a nutshell, really. Yeah, so basically think of it as like how obviously I know people have probably all seen footballers doing extra work on the outside in the gym, PT.
Yeah.
Think of it kind of like that, but in a football sense.
Absolutely amazing. And I've seen some of your social media where you kind of talk about the players who are doing really well and making
Yeah.
their moves up the football hierarchy. Do you want to give the listeners and the viewers a couple of names so they can get an idea of who you've coached?
Yeah, of course. Obviously, I can't reveal every name, but one lad, I guess, probably the one that, in terms of the professional game that I've worked with the longest is a lad called Gideon Kodiwa. Worked with him when he was 12 years old at West Ham. Obviously a good player, but lots of things to work on. Wasn't always the most confident lad, and then just worked with him over a number of years, helped build him up. And then last year was just an incredible year. If anybody saw what the West Ham under-18s done,
Yeah,
he was their
they won the cup, didn't they?
yeah, he was their captain. He scored that goal, the 40-yard lob in the final.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm not afraid to say that I had a little tear in my eye when he did that. And yeah, just a few players, players sort of like in and around. I don't want to highlight too many players. I only
Sure.
highlighted him because he's the one I've worked with probably the longest in regards to professional football. But I work with a group of players that they're really making their inroads into first team football now, which is great to see.
Yeah.
And
Amazing.
the idea is you stick with them throughout their career.
I'll forgive you sleeping with the enemy because I have to say I've slept with the enemy and worked a little bit for some rival clubs as well. Sometimes when you want to be in football, you have to. But you brought up the word confidence there, and it just sprung to me that something I've thought about a lot with Spurs over the last few years. I want to ask you directly now that you've brought that up.
Yeah.
Confidence is obviously a huge thing with players, and in terms of Spurs, I felt over the last couple of years we have a player in Ryan Sessegnon who I think is an absolute talent, right? Real
Mm.
potential. We bought potential. We've seen him do it in the Premier League before for Fulham, and he's had his moments for Spurs. He's played under a couple of, let's just say, defensive managers. But I feel like in terms of, and it's only my opinion, but in terms of looking at a player on the pitch, I've never seen a player at the top level with such potential kind of lack confidence in the way that I feel he does. Not your opinion, that's my opinion, but taking that as an example, what can you do at the elite level to kind of bring someone up out of that kind of situation? And I would also say back in the day, Gareth Bale actually had a time when he was at Spurs when he was lacking confidence as well, and there was that whole stuff about him not having won a game in 25 games or whatever. But at that elite level, is it about the manager putting an arm around you? Is it about being lucky enough to have the right kind of manager? And just to finish my question, could Big Ange be the right kind of manager to bring that out of Ryan Sessegnon and for us to see what talent he has?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few points to that. I guess that the first thing I'll say is that footballers are a lot mentally stronger than people give them credit for. For them to even get to the level of being a professional footballer, never mind one in the Premier League, it requires so much mental strength. But at the end of the day, they are still human. And when the lights are on you and things aren't going well, it's you. It is incredibly difficult for that not to have an effect on you. And it would be amazing if it was a one size fits all approach, but then there'd be no such thing as mental health issues and no such thing as lack of confidence, because the answer would be there. And unfortunately, it's not. And it's about understanding who the player is, who the person is, rather. That's probably a better way to say it, who the person is, understanding them as a person before a footballer. And first of all, making sure that they're okay as a person, making sure that, they're being helped with whatever they need, good and bad. And just but in terms of getting the best from them in terms of a player, about understanding what makes them tick and how do they work best. Do they need an arm around the shoulder? I think you can see with Ryan Sessegnon, I agree completely. He has no confidence in his game. When he's getting the ball, he never tries to go at his man. If he does, it's always like last ditch. And that's in him. And a lot of that is also down to the kind of player he is. I think he's been misrepresented as a player quite a lot. I don't think he's. I think it's very. You've done it there with Gareth Bale, but you've done it more because of the storyline. But I remember people were sort of hoping that he was going to be the next Gareth Bale for Tottenham in terms of style, and he's never been that player. He's always been a player that's like ghosted into certain areas and finished from crosses or cutbacks and put good balls across and things like that. And I think that he's never really perhaps been best utilised for that. So it's a very, very difficult one. I think in terms of what Ange can do with him. Yeah, listen, I think Ange is the perfect manager to give a player confidence, but at the end of the day, it will always be the player themselves that dictates how far they go. And that's not to say they do it on their own, of course not. You need help around you, but I think it's to put it bluntly, it is crunch time coming up this year for Ryan Sessegnon. And of course, what he's achieved already is remarkable, and there's no reason he can't go on to improve at Tottenham. But I do think I feel a little bit sorry for him because of that misprofiling of who he is. People expect him to be this player that's going to burn past players and explode past them, and he's never been that, and that's not his game.
Yeah.
But there is no question that he is a shell of himself, and has been because of that. I think, as you said, the confidence or the lack of.
Yeah, totally. I don't know, maybe naively, I'm quite excited to see what Ange can do with Bryan Hill, Ryan Sessegnon, and Gio Lo Celso. I want to keep, I mentioned to you before, I want to keep these kind of interviews nice and sweet and pithy. So let's talk about Big Ange. Are you as excited with your kind of coaching hat on as I am? I'm most impressed, in fact, with the way that I feel like he is making players who people doubted actually show their full potential. How far can this go, do you think? How excited are you?
Let me show you how excited I am. 1 second. It was my birthday, literally last week.
I love it. I love it. The book.
This is coaching me. Three Big Ange books. Got the Australian one there, the first one. Then his time at Celtic, and then there's one that came out recently. I think literally just he's about to start the Tottenham, what's it called, Revolution. So there you go.
Harry Brook's never not working.
Listen, to be honest, that honestly isn't the Spurs fan in me. That is me loving him as a manager and as a coach. I loved him at Celtic. I won't profess to have watched all of Celtic play every single game. There's only so much time in the world, but I was obviously made aware of him when he went to join Celtic, because it was a very interesting move, and okay, you want to hear about this person, and you saw certain things they were working on. It's like, okay, right, that's interesting. You hear more about who he is as a person and watch his teams play. And I just think he's fantastic. I think he is already comfortably my favourite ever Spurs manager. He has, like I said at the start of the show, it's very difficult for someone like me to be a complete fan, because let's say, for example, I work with an Arsenal player. I can't, do you see what I mean? So,
of course.
But I would be lying if but also it's been hard for me to be, love the club with how they've behaved the last few years. But what Aaron just done is completely take me back to that fan. I'm going to games now as a fan. I can't help it. I think he is incredibly likable. I think I don't know who he is personally, but you can see that he's a very decent human being. I think that makes a big difference. I think he just has this ability to connect people and to bring people together. And he doesn't do it with any narrative or fluff. It's all just honest, genuine, authentic work. And he is so self-confident in his ideas, the team around him, that you can't not be self-confident from that yourself. And I just think he's got the whole club right now on his back, and he's just taking them through, and he just seems like that trusting father figure. And that's not, I haven't even really discussed his actual coaching and, the way the team plays. I think the coaching is outstanding. The way the team plays, it's not just attractive for the sake of it. It's effective. It's ways to hurt the opposition, ways to attack. So at the moment, I couldn't be happy. I really couldn't.
Amazing. And I feel like it's such a far cry. And I'll be honest, like I thought Conte was the right person. I thought we were lucky to have him at the start. And I thought Jose could do a job with us. And it was that kind of just what I have to say, it was what Levy said in that fan forum. He felt it was time to get a win now manager. A lot of people had talked about it. But now that we've got Ange and the way that he talks, just as you described, and the way that he is, totally relentless about, I'm playing this kind of football because this is the best kind of football for us to win games. Yeah. Now it makes me think, how did I ever get kind of tricked into thinking any different? Doesn't make any sense. And I personally think Spurs, I think we need to keep this manager as long as we can for a start. But secondly, we also need to be deep thinking about lists in the background for if he gets poached by Man City or someone else, who is the next man who can take it on? Do you know what I mean? And not fall into this kind of flip-flopping of attacking manager to defensive manager to man manager to, carrot and stick. Do you see what I mean?
I think with, what you said there is, I think I agree with you regarding Jose and Conte. First of all, they are fantastic managers, but it's one of those situations where the problem with them two wasn't necessarily them two. Of course, they made mistakes, but the fact that it's not going to work unless the club is moving in the same direction, sorry. And if you have a win now manager, as people call them, but your approach is still very much of like, well, we're a developmental phase, then there's going to be that disparity, and it's going to be fireworks, and not in a good way. There's going to be those clashes. So it doesn't matter what approach you take. You can be the developmental phase. You can be the ones that want to do it over time. You want to be the ones that perhaps get the overall structure into place, whatever it might be. But as long as the club is geared towards that approach, that is what matters. And as you said, the ad hoc approach of win now go back to this, now go back to that, now do it. It was always going to be a mess. So it seems to be, whether it's on purpose or by accident, they've fallen into a situation now where they are looking to be structured in this way. They're looking to build the overall structure of the club to protect itself in case Ange or when does go, whatever that might be, or a certain player leaves, and it doesn't all fall apart because the understanding and the structure is there, and then the next person comes in and in their way, but still carries on that process, I guess is the right word. Yeah,
completely. Okay, so it comes to the old prediction question then. How far can Ange take us? And let's just stick to this season for now. I think we've all been surprised at the start, but you're seeing it from a more analytical, tactical viewpoint than I ever could. What do you think could potentially happen? What's a realistic take?
Anything can happen. So, people will say, oh, there's no chance of winning the league. Well, of course, there is a chance. Now, it's a very unlikely chance. You can't really point to the Leicester because that was a freak. But, things can happen, and Spurs are a very, very good team. I think the two things that will let Spurs down is I think they still lack that, I call it a presence forward. And by presence, I don't mean they're the biggest physically player. They just have that aura and presence where the attacks in the final third, they go through them. James Maddison's more the person that feeds that presence, but they that forward in that forward line that could be like, I'm the guy, I'll take charge of this, like it's 0-0, like give the ball to me, I'm gonna go score the winner, whatever that might be.
I feel like we used to have one of those.
Yeah, funny that. Yeah, we've had a few over the years. Yeah, one of them left recently. Can't remember his name quite. No, no, yeah. Actually, you know what? With Harry Kane, I actually want him to win it all. I loved him. Well. Still do. I'm not one of those people that's bitter. I loved him. Still do.
I do as well. I put notifications on their games on live score now. I have to say, I have to say I've had this conversation with a few people, but I'm like, what would happen if they, like, how quickly do you think Harry Kane would try and move back to the Premier League if they won the Champions League and the Bundesliga this season? I think he would be like looking to go straight away.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I think he'd want to give it at least 2 years, but it wouldn't surprise me if after that he starts to angle for a move as long as he's won, the trophies he has at Bayern Munich. And then I think to carry on, I think the second thing they lack is probably what most people recognise is that depth. At the moment they've got a fantastic first 11. They've got some good rotation options, but I think if there's an injury to Vicario, the two centre halves, Basuma and Madison, it's disaster. Like any of those guys are out, it's disaster. I I like Højbjerg. You know, people might say he's a good cover for Basuma, but it's a very different thing, very different way of playing, very different requirements. I think that people will, underestimate how important Basuma is. So I just think it's those two things that I think will stop it. But to be honest, anything can happen. So if, for example, touch wood, this doesn't happen, but if there was some of those disaster injuries in the next week or so, maybe I wouldn't be as confident on getting top four.
Yeah.
But if the team stays as it is, stays fit, stays fresh, then I would certainly expect them to get top four at a minimum. And listen, who knows? Who knows what can end up happening? But I would say those are the two things that are perhaps stopping Tottenham from being genuine um,
title challenge. Yeah, I think I kind of agree. Although just because I'm very excitable at the moment, I'm going to play glass half full and say it's even exciting that if we had those, to me, it's even exciting that if we had those disaster injuries, I feel like Ange would put his trust in some younger players and he would not be afraid to put players in who have the attributes for the position rather than maybe some former managers would put a player in because he is the next hierarchical player or the elder player. Do you see what I mean? And then we would learn more about those players.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And yeah, I agree with that. I don't listen, if there were those injuries, I don't think it would fall apart. I think Ange's too good for that. But I just don't, I think obviously it would become more of a challenge because at the end of the day, like you could be the best manager in the world. It will still be the player quality, and how the players perform and, how good they are and I think most managers would admit that. Of course, a good manager gets the best out of their players and gets more from them than what others maybe have done. But it still has to be the players that perform on a Saturday or a Sunday, whenever it is. So, yeah, I think obviously it wouldn't fall apart at all. I think Ange's too good, like I said. But those would be my two main concerns.
Cool. And last question. I don't know, you may not have an answer to this, but hearing on the grapevine, you work with a lot of kind of young and academy players. Who's the next great hope coming out of Spurs? Is it Mikey Moore? He's the one I keep reading about.
Yeah, Marky Moore's a fantastic talent. Yeah. So obviously, a few of the lads are getting quite a lot of coverage now. I know there's a lot of excitement about Marky Moore. Very interesting player, good ball manipulation, really creative, good instincts, has that sort of like off the cuff ingenuity. Obviously, everybody knows about Jamie Donnelly. He was on the bench recently. He's another fantastic talent. He could be someone that could be potentially maybe even a James Maddison cover for now. Maybe higher up the pitch. He's a phenomenal talent. Yeah, I'd say that Spurs Academy right now, there's some real talents coming through. Obviously, there's some others that perhaps I'm going to keep a bit under my nose. Otherwise, I might get a few angry phone calls from parents. But yeah, listen, there's some fantastic talent coming through at Tottenham. And put it this way, I would be amazed if at least two or three of them aren't making decent first team impressions by this time next year. Or yeah.
Very exciting, and also a far cry from what was happening under Antonio, where there didn't seem to be any kind of through route. Very cool. So, Harry, let the viewers and the audience and the listeners know where they can find you on social media.
I always get asked this, and I always forget my actual @. Bear with me. There it is.
I think you're at @HBrooks_coach or something.
You actually know better than me. Yeah, it is that. Yeah, there you go. So HBrooks_coach. You can see I'm not very good with this stuff, but yeah, Twitter and Instagram is the same. I made sure to do that at a bare minimum. So if I can't even remember one, so I don't have to remember two of them. So yeah, it's HBrooks_coach, and people can check that out if they want to see some examples of who I work with and any opinions I have.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on the Spurred On podcast and giving your opinions. A learned opinion, not very often seen when it's just people listening to what I have to say. Thanks so much. And everybody, come on, you Spurs.